It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Gabriel Diaz Maggioli, a renowned writer, author, scholar, university teacher, and that's a key word, teacher for all of us, and perhaps most importantly for us here, president of our association, IATEFL, and it's been my great pleasure as a fellow trustee to work with him on the Board of Trustees. I'm sure that I'm not the only one in this room who reads, likes reading, is an avid reader, voracious reader, a print addict, whatever you like to call yourself. And so the topic of Gabriel's session is one which is very dear, Gabriel's plenary is one which is very dear to my heart. Reading gives us, as he says, access to other worlds beyond our own, to a multitude of other worlds beyond our own. And I'm sure that many of us, if not all of us, want to pass this on to our learners. I'm particularly looking forward to hearing the connection between COVID, the change of paradigm, and current assumptions about reading, but I'm also quite sure that this won't affect my general attitude to reading and to the pleasure it gives me. So I'd like you all to give a warm welcome to our President, Gabriel Diaz Maggioli.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for attending. I decided to name this talk, Reading the World and the Word, and I'm speaking to you in my role as university lecturer, working mostly with pre-service English language teachers. And here is where I started wondering about our practices in teaching reading and what we mean by reading. So I have a little picture for you to look at. And I'm going to ask you a question. Please answer my question, not what you want to answer my question. Here's a picture. It's a detail from one of Edward Hopper's paintings. It's called Compartment C. What is going on in this image? Shout out your answer. A person is reading, did I hear that correctly? Yeah? Now, sitting on a train, but somebody said a person is reading. I'm going to ask you another question. What do you see that makes you say so? She's looking at a book, but is she reading? So, to me, reading is perhaps one of the most abused practices in the English language classroom. And not only is it abused, but up to a certain extent, if you look at the history of research into second and foreign language reading, the field has become somehow stagnant. When you look at the literature, there are constant citations of research done on reading in the second and foreign language classroom in the 1980s. And to me, at this day and age, where we are flooded by texts of different sorts, all around our homes, all around our lives, all around our environments, we are doing students a disservice if we continue teaching reading in the way we've done it so far. Because reading is, above all, a particular practice which facilitates access to the world. But this is not a practice that we come equipped for. We have to learn it. So if in the teaching of the reading, we don't give the students the necessary means to relate to texts and their nature, what we are actually doing is limiting their possibilities, right? So let's start by reflecting a little bit. And then I'm going to engage you in a few reading activities that we do in the language classroom. And let's see what we can conclude. I'm going to show you 10 sentences or statements that when I was preparing this talk, I asked different colleagues, students, I asked them, what is reading? And I got 10 answers. I'm going to show them in a moment. They are numbered from 1 to 10. On a piece of paper, just write down the ones that you believe reading is, okay? There are no right or wrong answers. You are not going to share this with anybody else. So here it is, my short list of 10 definitions of reading. Just write down the ones that you believe to be true. Okay? Yep. So, let's test our assumptions. I'm going to show you 5 distinct passages. Some of them are texts, some others are passages. And I'm going to ask you to perform a reading activity typical of the ones we do in the language classroom. Are you ready? Here's my first passage. And the topic of our talk today is the teaching of reading. So I'm going to ask you to do some skimming. Read the text quickly and tell me what the main idea is. Okay? As you're trying to do so, please check what is going on in your head, how you're going about reading. So what is the main idea of this text? Reading is not receptive. There we go. Good. So you did some skimming. Now I want you to do some scanning, right? We always do scanning when we do reading, right? So the task for the second one is, what are the 2 main factors in reading? Ready? Here we go. Again, as you try to find the 2 main factors, keep tabs of what is happening in your head, how you're going about the process of reading. The 2 main factors? What are the 2 main factors? The text and the reader, right? Now, this gives reading a 2-dimensional kind of nature, right? Whereas there's the reader with a capital R, the person, and the reader, the text from which the interaction surfaces. So, let's see how we comprehend these texts. Another usual activity we do is a famous close the fill in the blanks, right? And again, let's read it and see what goes on when we are doing this. Do you have some answers? Yep. Do they look anything like this? Yeah? Okay. So if you have managed to tell me what the main idea of the first passage was, if you've managed to tell me what the two main factors involved in reading are, if you were able to fill in the blanks, we can assume you're good readers, right? Yeah. Now, I'm going to give you a reading test. And this is a test consisting of 4 questions. I'm going to time you, and I'm going to give you exactly 2 minutes to answer the 4 questions. Please do not talk to anybody next to you. Just read the text. Don't say anything. This is a test. And answer the questions, which is what we generally do. You ready? Here we go. It might help you to read the questions before reading the text. Ten seconds to go. 5. Pens down. Okay, let's check. What were the plums chopping? Can you make a complete sentence, please? The plums were chopping a blur. Good. What did the plum drum the thrasher? Okay, good. Were the plums chopping on Lady Own? No. No, they? Very good. Complete sentences, people. Complete sentences. And what was the thrasher peeling the plums? Read the last sentence, the one between inverted commas. Come on. You can do this. You can do this. How to chop blars. Very good. Complete sentence. The thrasher was peeling the plums. How to chop blars. Wonderful. Congratulations, you've passed the test. Give yourselves a pat on the back. What is this text about? Chopping blars, chopping bloggies. Okay, what if I told you that if I give you the meaning of 2 words only, you can understand the whole text? Would you believe me? Yes. As we do this, you can now talk to a person next to you. Just keep track of what is going on in your head, right? These are the two words. A blar is a text and a plum is a student. So I'll give you some minutes to just enjoy the process. Okay, I know that many of you thought we were talking about animals here, but actually, this is the text. Has it ever happened to you? It has certainly happened to me, right? So, one last text for you to enjoy. And, you know, these activities I've been doing with you are rather traditional, right? Not so communicative as we would like. And with the communicative revolution, one of the favorite activities is like, why don't we give a title to this text? Read the text and give it a title, right? Because that is the best kind of summary. So I'm going to show you a short text, and I want you to give it a title. This you can discuss with the person next to you. Do you have a title for this text? Yes? Perhaps? No? Come on, it's a nice little text. It's about, the title is what the text is about. Many things. Would that be a good title? Many things. Problems, problems, problems. Very creative answer, by the way. Now, let me do something. Let me just show you one image that will make this text transparent. Okay? Does it make sense now? So, I'm going to invite you to go back to our assumptions about reading, the ones we talked about today, and let's see if you want to change anything. This you don't have to share with anybody. Go back to the experiences we've had and what you have been doing. So we've been talking about reading as being a two-dimensional construct, where there's a reader and a text, and there's interaction. We all know that, don't we? There are other dimensions to reading as well. For example, we know that we can do basically two kinds of reading in the English language classroom. Intensive reading, where we do activities, exercises, tasks, whatever you want to call them or do, or extensive reading. There are a lot of myths about this, and there are also a lot of kind of dark areas. For example, extensive reading. What do you know about extensive reading? Research has consistently shown that it's one of the most effective ways of language learning or acquisition. Reading for pleasure equips us with a lot of goodies. However, we don't do enough of that in the classroom because we are bound by syllabi, we are bound by textbooks, and we have put this activity of reading as a skill, right? So we have the language, we have the skills, and we have the content as three separate boxes. My contention is we need to stop looking at things in little boxes and little squares. We need to really start looking at the processes our students go through in order to do something that is uniquely human, which is creating new meanings. And they do that with the mediation of the teacher, using a variety of tools, for example, texts or images or body language or any other tool that you can think of. We know that extensive reading is very, very effective, yet we don't do enough of it. There's also the whole issue of what reading is. I am a teacher educator and I am in charge of supervising my students' early professional experiences. And novice teachers generally consider that reading, if you're not going to do a reading comprehension lesson, say you are asking the students to read a short text so as to then do a speaking activity, they can just say, okay, can you please start reading? And in a foreign language situation, what you hear is guttural noises of students attempting to decode. And there's always been this tension between reading as decoding or reading as comprehending. Comprehending means making sense of not symbols, but a message, an intention that somebody put in those symbols. The decoding part is simply a mechanical part in which we can be trained. I can say from personal experience that even the most dyslexic of students, given the proper mediation, the proper support, the proper attainable level of challenge, will be able to comprehend the text. And last but not least, I would like you to start entertaining whether we are doing lower order reading or higher order reading. Are you blogging Chofi or are you teaching reading? Much of what happens in materials, unfortunately still, is mostly lower order kind of engagement. And when teachers say, oh, my students don't like reading, and I see both the materials that are being used and the pedagogical sequences applied, my answer is like, yeah, why should they? I mean, there's nothing to like about this. So what I would like to do in the rest of our time together is to show you how we could perhaps, this is just one attempt at making reading a little bit more three-dimensional and making reading what it should be, which is a social-cultural practice. This is something that humans in literate societies engage in, but humans in illiterate societies do not. However, harnessing the power of the comprehension of a text gives students amazing differentials. So we need to really rethink how we go about it. For example, the benefits of extensive reading. Kieran Donaghy has this short list, which is a very good summary of the literature. And we know that when students, oh, I have it there, sorry. When students read extensively, they become better readers. They learn more vocabulary, they improve their writing, they improve their overall language competence, they become more motivated learners, they develop learner autonomy, and they become more empathic. However, when you talk to teachers and you ask them, how much extensive reading do you do in the classroom? And I'm quoting our dear own Sue Leather here in one of her latest books, last year's Extensive Reading, published by Routledge. Look at what she and her colleague say. Basically, the syllabus does not include extensive reading, even though we know that is a very good thing. Extensive reading is not tested in exams. Even when we had examinations that engaged students in reading a novel throughout a course, then there was a composition on the novel. It was not reading for pleasure. Syllabi and textbooks focus only on intensive reading, and particularly when we have something like the Common European Framework breaking down the skills in little discrete performance boxes, the only thing that contributes to our courses is the competence we need to develop, the skill, the strategy. We do not just claim. We don't have time to do extensive reading nowadays unless this is an add-on to our courses. If we have a reading club, for example, a book club, or if, as happens in some parts of the world, as part of the course, you are supposed to access the library and read a number of books a year just for the pleasure of reading them and then sharing that information with your peers. And then extensive reading means giving more control over learning to students, because they are the ones who choose what they want to read, when they want to read, and how they want to read. And we know that some teachers are uncomfortable with this, unfortunately. So, we know that extensive reading is good. We don't do enough of it. And one of my contentions here is also that if we are always chopping bloggy, we are not giving the students access to the tools that they need to be able to enjoy a text. Where do we in real life go about, like, have you read the newspaper today, Moitza? What did it say on page 1? Can you give me a synonym for? No, we don't go about life doing that. We have intelligent conversations about what we've read. How many times do we have that in the classroom? We don't have it enough times. Now, because this is not enough, the evidence from research is not enough, we also have research from neuroscience that tells us about the power of reading. There was a wonderful article coming out last year, 2021, on how reading changes the brain for the better. And the more we read, and the more we are able to engage with a text from the point of view of enjoying our activity of engaging with the text, the more our brain grows. For example, we know that short-term, reading is an empathy workout. I'm going to show you a picture. This is a picture of a brain being scanned while reading. And the pink areas show you motor areas. So the person is reading about walking, and those areas of the brain involved in walking, not in reading, are the ones that flare up. So when we talk about an empathy workout, what we are talking about is reading is a bridge to us relating to the world. My question is, how much of the world do we integrate in our reading lessons? Because how is it that we understand? We don't just understand by decoding symbols, putting them into words, and words into phrases and clauses and sentences, which is still the norm in many descriptions of reading around the world, unfortunately, particularly in the global south. We understand by using contexts of various sorts. The reading experiences that I engaged you in were intended to bring about this context. Of course, you all resorted to your grammatical context of a sentence. We're all language teachers, and we know that. But our students are expert language users of their own mother tongue or the other languages that they speak. And they can play that game. I always put as an example my son Federico. Federico struggled, he's dyslexic, and he struggled heavily with understanding the Spanish language. And Spanish courses are all about syntax and grammar and all those things. Because both my wife and I are language teachers and we refused to limit our kids, we send them to English classes. And Federico is extremely proficient in English. He's bilingual, actually. And you know how he made sense of his own language? So el pretérito is the present perfect in English. Right? So our students already have tools that allow them to make the necessary connections to derive meaning from the text that they engage in. Then there is semantic context within sentences, and here is where we have a problem. Because in many approaches to teaching reading, the norm is select the new vocabulary, pre-teach the new vocabulary, and we all know what happens. We spend a lot of time eliciting, we build our new vocabulary list on the board, and then when students get into the text, they get to the first new word and they say, what's the meaning of? And this is because words get their meaning by being in the vicinity of other words, right? And that is where a cohesive message gets constructed. It's not like I can have all these predetermined words that you just import into your lexicon. We also go to the situational and pragmatic context, which is, why is this text relevant? Why did anybody ever write this text? For which purpose? And if this text had a purpose, what purpose would the reader have to read it? Okay? Unfortunately, much of the reading that we do in English language teaching is reading because you need to learn a little bit more grammar, right? Or a little bit more vocabulary. But it doesn't stop there. We also have an intercultural context, right? Where meaning is created by being highly situated and localized. And people who are not members of that community do not have access to that meaning. And there's also schematic context. We all have background knowledge, and more importantly, when we talk about students, we all have something very deeply said, which is our funds of knowledge. It's the knowledge that we grow by being in social environs since our birth until the moment we start formal schooling. All that is an incredibly rich source of knowledge, but it's also the basis of our strongly held beliefs. So many times our schematic knowledge stands against what the words in the text say because it conflicts with our beliefs. How many times do we teachers look at that? And last but not least, not everybody around the world reads in the same way or reifies reading in the same way. So there is a social cultural context. There it is, which talks about how reading is valued in a particular society. Now, if you add all this together, you very clearly see that reading is not a two-dimensional thing. There's so much outside the text and the reader that goes into actually comprehending a text that we need to think when we prepare a lesson based on a text, whether you are actually tackling all the contexts. Because if we don't, then we're doing our students a disservice. So what I'm going to invite you to do is to help me show you how we can help students read the world. Because unless they read the world, they won't be able to read the Word. As I said, reading, to me, as it is done now, is pretty much two-dimensional, the reader and the text. And we all know that good practice in teaching reading entails a pre-reading stage, a while reading stage, and a post-reading stage. Can you all raise your right hand, please? Can you put it on your heart? Now, do you systematically do this? Yes. You sure? Okay. What do you do as a pre-reading activity? We discuss the topic. If you look at most textbooks, they give a question, right? And then the students discuss the question, and then they look for the answer in the text, basically to check whether they are right or not. Is that a reading activity or a pre-reading activity? It is actually a reading activity. What the students did before was basically answer a question out of the blue. Yes, we told them we are talking about music today, but the connection, we need to establish a connection between the reader, the world, and the text. So let me show you, by giving you an example, of a reading sequence that we built with my student teachers. We're going to go step by step through the three phases or moments. Now, the first thing we need to do is to, what is generally called, activate the student's background knowledge, okay? So we need to specifically design activities that bring the students' schemata to focus on the area that the text will be about. So in prior knowledge, we have a little reading text that my students have used, and this is what I'm going to show you. A good activity. This is a picture. What I would like you to do is to take a piece of paper, and can you make a little telescope, right? Make it as narrow as you can. And what I want you to do is to look at the picture through the little telescope from left to right and from top to bottom. Right? Let's do that. Left to right and top to bottom. While you're doing it, you may be thinking, but this is a stupid activity. It is not. Our students are not used to reading long texts unless they are interested in them, right? Most of the texts that they read are short, snappy texts on social media, right? So even though they know how to read in their own language, we need to start training the eye for what we want them to do. In the Western world, we read from left to right, from top to bottom. So this little activity that helps students notice something about the topic, right, can also help us. And this comes from museum education. It's not something particularly related to reading. Museum educators do this to help you focus on details in art. So what did you discover about this picture? What can you tell me about that picture? Anything that caught your attention? If you were a teenager, everybody focuses in the little picture on the frame. Thor, there you go, Thor. The actor Chris Hemsworth, Thor, right? So there we have something. Any other thing you noticed? Ellen DeGeneres, right? How many people know Ellen DeGeneres? How many people can actually watch the Ellen show? Do you think that my students in Uruguay can watch the Ellen show? No. But we have a guy with an Ellen t-shirt. So we started very broad. What did you notice in the picture? Let's narrow things down a bit and let's help our students make predictions, okay? We know that when students predict and then check their predictions, comprehension is facilitated. So this is the activity. I'm going to show you a picture. I want you to talk to somebody next to you and put the two pictures that I'm going to show you together somehow. So I start with Thor, of course, and a teenager, right? So they work in pairs. Then I tell them, now, I'm going to add one more element here, right? And I want you to connect the three. So how would this change? And then I tell them, I will add a fourth element that you will have to put together. The richness of the discussions and how the predictions change is just amazing. And then, so as to consolidate this, I'm going to let my students preview the text because I'm at the pre-reading stage still, right? And how is the preview? I asked them this question. What would you do if you found a wallet that belonged to a famous Hollywood actor? Would you keep it, try to sell it on eBay, or return it to the owner? I'm talking about teenagers here, right? Young adults. Fruitful discussion. So then, my preview is, I'm going to show you the title of the article that we are going to read. But you have to complete it. Okay? So if you look at this, what we've been doing is starting off from a very broad perspective, building up the different contexts of the world, and leading the students to say, hey, this is cool, this is interesting. What are we going to read about? And then we go into the text, the while reading phase. And here is where I put my foot down always. I might be wrong, but to me it has worked. In my situation, it's worked. The first thing I do is tackle vocabulary, but not in the usual way. This is the text, and this is an activity that I've been doing for a while that works very well. I ask the students, you have to find the opposite of the word that is in the rectangle, right? The opposite of the word in the rectangle appears in the text. Now, we know that if we just give them the opposite, they take forever. So what I do is, but I'm going to help you, I'm going to scaffold your reading by providing you approximations to the word. So the word in the rectangle is the opposite. But there's a nearer synonym in one of the ovals, and the oval closest to the text is the closest synonym to the word, right? They do the activity individually in pairs. You have it there, right? And once we've cleared out vocabulary, we go on to questioning. Yeah, students need to learn how to answer questions. But the nature of the questions is the important thing. If you look at the questions we are asking here, they do not directly relate to the content of the text. However, they cannot be answered unless the students understand the text. These are wide-ranging questions, they are not direct reference, and they encourage students to talk about the text, not say or replicate what the text says. And of course, there's one moment, because we're language teachers, where we should use the text for any other pretext. And I call this the archaeological dig that I do with the text. What is an archaeological dig? Well, basically, you know how archaeologists do. They decide, they have evidence that there might be something on a plot of land. They first of all clearly delimit the plot of land and with a brush slowly uncover the object. Now, we are doing the same but with language. The text is a social construction, and we have the secrets to understanding the text. Now, why don't we pass on the secrets to the students? So the archaeological dig moment is that moment when you help students understand how the text works and why the text was constructed. I'm using Luciana de Oliveira's advice on working with texts, where she says, focus on the contents of the text. Yes, because that's where students are coming from. They have done 2 readings of the text by the time they get here, one for the vocabulary, at least 2, one for the questioning. But then, how does the author enact a relationship with the reader? We are also demonstrating how our text can help students write. And last but not least, focus on the organization. And here you have your grammar, you have your vocabulary, your connectors, everything that adds to the cohesion and cohesiveness of the message. And then, what do you do with all this? In general, the post-reading is engage other skills. That is what most methodology books say. Here we want the students to appropriate the text. And by appropriating, I mean, let them manipulate the text at their level of understanding so that they experience, I can do this. So there are 3 things that we do in the post-reading stage. The first one is the oral summary, right? An oral summary of the text, which does not mean repeat what the text says, but this is what my students and I came up with. Work in pairs, share a similar story, real or imaginary, with a partner, and then work with another pair. Tell the other pair your partner's story. This is B1 level, so we need to really do this kind of activities. And the others have to decide, is it a true story? What will they be looking at? They'll be looking at the text, at the organization. They will be capitalizing on everything we've done. And then, because we're language teachers, yes, we integrate skills. We have a written summary. How would you do a written summary? Here, we started off with this picture, the guy holding a letter. So what better thing to say than write the letter? What does the letter say? Work in pairs and write it and then share with other pairs. But because we're also educators, we want to extend the understanding a little bit more and help students to compare themes. Have you read any texts which are similar to this? Or let's focus on, we're dealing with teenagers and young adults. this is a story about honesty. What other values are there? And we created this crazy spinner where they discover the values and then they have to draw them, or they have to define it, or say a synonym, act it out, etc., etc. This is done in 50 minutes, 45 minutes, the duration of the class. And yes, we have tackled the pre, the while, and the post. And we have somehow moved from a two-dimensional position to a three-dimensional position, where the lesson has different layers that engage the students with more and more deeply accessing the meaning of the text. This is just one example of what we would call reading not as a skill, but reading as mediated sociocultural praxis, where there is a lot of interaction, there is a lot of scaffolding and supported understanding, and where the idea is not to have the students just take things from the text, but take control over the reading activity, not just by doing activities, but by developing strategies. And this is sociocultural insofar we are looking at reciprocity between the reader and the reading process and the teacher, and reciprocity between the world. We are looking not as a student who is at B1 level, we are looking at a functional reader in a foreign language in the future, so we transcend the here and now. We also embed meaningfulness in every single activity from the get-go. We allow multimodality. We work with pictures, with feelings, we work with alternative semiotic systems other than language to build understanding. And one important thing is that we are somehow respecting what the society values. So we go from the social to the individual. We demonstrate, we model for our students what in our society or in the society of the English-speaking country they are going to study in is valued. And the word read comes from reading the world. And I'm not the first one to say that. My inspiration came from whom but Paulo Freire. In 1987, in a wonderful book, he and Donaldo Macedo said, reading the world always precedes reading the word, and reading the word implies continually reading the world. We haven't got into the social justice aspect of this approach. I've looked at it from a technicist perspective. But I think it could get started, it could help us get started in discussing and appreciating this. So I thank you very much for listening. This is my bibliography, and I look forward to talking about this with you today in the Q&A. Thank you very much.